So today is Saturday, March 30th, 2019, and we're nearing the conclusion of our journey through Before Buddha Was Buddha, learning from the Jataka Tales, written by myself, published by Wisdom Publications in the spring of 2018. So today we'll look at the chapter titled The Final Challenge, Touching the Earth. It's not a Jataka, but it's the context. It establishes the context for how the Jatakas really function in Buddhist tradition, mythically. So the story of the Buddha's enlightenment is what we'll begin with. So when the prince of the Shakya clan, Siddhartha Gautama, was 29 years old, he saw an old man, a sick man, a dead man, and a dedicated truth seeker. He took it in, the inescapability of aging, sickness, and death, and became determined to seek truest wisdom. He took off his jewels and, leaving the protective walls of his palace, shaved his beard and cut off his long hair. Crossing the river boundary of his father's kingdom, he entered the lonely forests and mountains and never looked back. He sought out the two most widely respected religious teachers of his time, and mastering their methods, gained steadiness and calm. But it was not enough. Not freed from birth, old age, sickness, and death, he moved on. In forests and graveyards, he took up a path of austerity, attempting to gain liberation by willfully harming the body and increasing the mind's anguish. Over time, he limited eating until he was surviving on 1,000, then 100, then 10, and then just one single sesame seed a day. His flesh and muscles withered, his eyes sank deep into their sockets, his hair rotted and fell out. His ribs, bony sockets, joints, skull, and bones stood out like the wreck of a ship exposed by the tide. After 6 years of such focused, determined efforts, he was hovering at the point of death, more a skeleton wound with sinews and veins than a living man. Having failed in his quest for enlightenment, he would die, his great purpose unrealized, the goal of freedom beyond his grasp. The bitterness of that moment could have no relief. Just at that dead-end limit of the ascetic's path, there flashed into his mind the memory of a festival day from deep in his childhood. He'd been seated back then under a rose apple tree, watching his father, the nobles, and peasants ceremonially plowing the earth together. He saw the earth breaking open in even wave-like furrows, the heat shimmering up off the freshly opened soil and shining on the sweat-slick brows and straining bodies of men and oxen alike, the sun flashing off the gilded traces and the gilded horns of the royal oxen. He heard the plodding rhythm of hooves and cowbells rolling in a solemn sea-like way beneath the shrill shouts of the men and the whirring cries of the birds as they dove to peck at and devour the billowing hordes of insects, blind, glistening grubs, cutworms, and broken bodies of mice, which men, oxen, and plows had left in their wake. Child though he was, the terribly obvious laboring, devouring, suffering, and dying, which went on beneath all the surface tinseling of his own easy festival days, had broken in upon him and weighed heavily on his mind. Seated alone beneath the rose-apple tree, reflecting deeply on the scene before him, self-centeredness had fallen away, and he'd entered samadhi. Now, at the brink of death, this memory returned, filling him with energy and purpose. He saw that if he'd already tasted the way, when just a child, well-fed and clothed, then enlightenment could not depend on simply punishing the body. As if in response, Sujata, a maiden from a neighboring village, stood and offered him, this dying holy man, a bowl of milk rice. When he accepted her life-saving meal, his 5 ascetic disciples, convinced that their ex-prince had abandoned his quest for truth, got up and left him. Alone, he ate in silence. When he had finished, he felt strong enough to stand. And leaning on his staff, he made his way to the shore of the nearby Naranjana River, where he bathed, washing away 6 years of accumulated filth. Climbing onto the shore, he announced, "This is the day of my supreme enlightenment. May this bowl float upstream." And he cast his empty bowl onto the flowing water, and instead of floating off with the current, the bowl forged upstream against the current, all the way to the whirlpool of Kala Nagaraja, the great Naga king. There it whirled down into jeweled chambers, the chambers of the Naga king's realm, and came to rest along a long row of identical bowls. Clink. Hearing that little sound, the ancient Naga king raised his hooded head and said, "Yesterday a Buddha arose. Today there shall be another Buddha. Awake, rejoice." And swaying in that timeless and shimmering light, he began to chant his ancient songs in praise of a bodhisattva's victory. Then the ex-prince Siddhartha Gautama headed for the Bodhi tree. On the way, he met a poor grass cutter who offered him 8 bundles of grass to serve as a sitting cushion and mat. Then the future Buddha, spreading the grass at the base of the tree, seated himself in the lotus posture and announced, "Though only my skin, sinews, and bones remain, and my blood and flesh dry up and wither away, I will not leave this spot until I have attained full enlightenment." And he pressed forward in deepening zazen. Many fearsome and foul, as well as seductive and pleasant visions arose before him. The forces of life's clinging to states of joy, comfort, and ease came swaying to him in the form of 3 women, the 3 beautiful daughters of Mara the tempter. They danced before him, offering exquisite pleasure, unceasing comfort, endless rest, while life's terrors, fears of death and suffering, of hell's horrors, pain, ugliness, the unknown, mobbed him, shrieking of torment, deformity, and all manner of terrible and disgusting experience should he persist. Mara's army descended, horse-headed, 10-eyed, tiger-faced, with faces in their chests, with sharp yellow teeth and blood-dripping mouths, with spiders for hands, hissing with adders' tongues. On they came, heaving stones, knives, spears, hurling flaming discs, mud and filth, shrieking madly. They whirled upon him like a flock of hunger-maddened crows, striving to peck and tear some slight scraps of nourishment from a huge, smooth stone, and they could not. At last Mara the tempter approached the future Buddha, and assuming the habit voice of Gautama's own innerness, Siddhartha Gautama was his name, he began to question the future Buddha. "Are you sure you are the one? Sure you have this Buddha nature? Sure you are worthy of coming to supreme enlightenment today, right now? Think of it. Supreme enlightenment, supreme enlightenment." The future Buddha simply touched the earth with his right hand and asked the earth to witness for him. And the earth replied with 100, 1,000, 100,000 voices. The voices of furrows and graves, voices of youth and age, of man, woman, and child. The unheeded cries of beasts, the quick, unknown, silvery language of fish, the sweet twinings of plants, and the warm, gray crumblings of stone. For all were one voice thundering, "He is worthy. There is not a single spot on this globe where he has not already offered himself totally, selflessly, through endless lifetimes to the attainment of enlightenment and the welfare of all living beings." Mara vanished, his army dropped their weapons and fled, his daughters begging forgiveness, prostrated and left. His war elephant, mountain-girded, the vehicle of ego's prideful strength, came crashing to the ground. Alone then beneath the tree, the future Buddha pressed on and on without stopping anywhere, arousing deeper and deeper practice without cease, transcending limitations, swallowing the darkness with his own light until with the dawn his mind rose clear and radiant and obvious as the daybreak. And when he glanced at the morning star, he found enlightenment itself crying out, "Wonder of wonders! Intrinsically, all living beings are Buddhas, fully endowed with wisdom and virtue." He was 35 years of age and had broken through to what others only half dreamed. The ancient path had been reopened. the Dharma was once more accessible to the efforts of humans and devas. In the steadily rising morning light, a full Buddha now sat beneath a suddenly blossoming tree. So that's an account of the Buddha's enlightenment, and I think it's a nice preface to next week. We have is it a half day or full day, Rose? Full? Yeah. Full day sitting in honor of the Buddha's birth. So nice to remember why we're doing this, and the Enlightenment story certainly puts it in context. So let's look at this from the perspective of practice. Enlightenment, also known as realization or intimacy, is both the goal and the living beating heart of Zen. Gaining some calm and experiencing peaceful sitting is good. Just look at the madness of our world if you doubt it. But if calm were all that Siddhartha was looking for, he never would have needed to leave home. He could have visited any local forest retreat. Get your calm on here. The billboards were up all over the place. It just wasn't enough. Having personally experienced impermanence, the insubstantiality of every person and thing, a fire was lit in his mind, heart, and gut. After that, he had no choice. He had to keep going until he touched solid ground. This is not just a Zen Buddhist, but a universal impulse, this desire to fully go beyond limits. James Stephens in Irish Fairy Tales writes, "The man who keeps putting one foot in front of the other will leave his home behind and will come at last to the sea and the end of the world." The man, make it person. The person who keeps putting one foot in front of the other will leave his home behind and will come at last to the sea and the end of the world. The end of the world doesn't necessarily mean standing at the edge of a cliff looking down at the sea. The end of the world could be right where we are. The world could stop right here, right now. The Buddha, not just in this last life, but through countless previous ones, you can take that literally or metaphorically, kept going all the way to the end of the arising of the world, an external world, as the legend of his enlightenment shows. It is a teaching we can all take to heart. Wherever we are, whatever we may have realized or not realized, we can keep going. The essence, as has been said of genius, is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. We do the work, then we keep doing the work. Kensho, intimately touching the ground of mind, is not the end of the road, but its beginning. It's like walking through a door, opening our eyes and saying, "Oh, right, here's the ground." We can then continue our journey up to the high peaks and down into misty valleys, knowing for ourselves that solid ground is always beneath our feet. In a number of Jatakas, the Bodhisattva sees into the reality of selflessness, the identity of form and emptiness, relative and absolute, and awakes to non-dual true nature. In many Jatakas, these were all milestone moments, but not yet full realization of original Buddhahood. As Hakuin says in the Zazen Wasan, song in praise of Zazen, from the very beginning, all beings are Buddha. In contemporary terms, we could say that in past lives, Prince Siddhartha had already been a religious teacher, a Zen student, a lay practitioner, an ordained practitioner, a Vajrayana student, a hermit monk, a community leader, a wandering sadhu, a Theravadan monastic, a businessman, a family man, a carpenter, juggler, robber, ox herder, farmer, caravan leader. The list is endless. He'd also had countless lives committed to ethical practice, whether as human, god, or animal. Buddhist tradition says that regardless of where he was born or what form he was born as, whatever challenging life issue he faced, he always chose to go farther over the next hill, beyond the next river, through the next dark forest. Not ignoring a problem, but working with it, he actualized the great way. Literally, Maha, great, Yana, way. Onward, further, was his nature as it is ours. It is why the Tao is called the way, or the path. Practice realization is not static, but a road that continues endlessly. A Japanese saying sums it up. Even Shakyamuni Buddha is only halfway there. This in itself is a stunning pointer as to how endless so-called endlessness might be. Shakyamuni Buddha himself is only halfway there. Zen reveres the story of the historical Buddha's enlightenment because it dramatically reveals our own potential, even as it reveals the work, the persistence, perseverance, determination, and dedication that will underlie all milestone experiences. Buddha has his Christ on the cross moment, too, when he discovers that willful asceticism has not clarified a thing, but only left him bereft in a dark, empty, and useless place. And though the ex-prince sat and sat, in the end, sitting wasn't enough. There still had to be a trigger to his realization experience. It didn't just come from looking within. It could have been a word, a sound, or anything really, for he was ripe, the mind empty of all fixed habitual limits. And when he glanced up after his long night of focused practice and saw the morning star, it was, aha! Gone, gone, entirely gone. Prajna paramita, completely clear. A morning star sat on 8 bundles of grass. No one seeing is real seeing. No one sitting is genuine seeing. Just star, star! Before that moment, the Buddha-to-be hadn't just been sitting, though, like a frog under the Bodhi tree. He was poised and open, alert as a cat crouched before a mouse hole. When Mara challenged him, he responded. He didn't get caught up, but he didn't ignore the challenge either. Likewise, when situations arise in our lives, we can't just go off and sit until they're gone. There comes a time to act. It need not be a big deal. In fact, it would be wise not to make it, whatever it is, a big deal. The Buddha simply touched the earth and asked the earth to witness for him. He didn't try to muster a list of reasons and out-argue Mara, prove his point, make sure he was right. He just did what was exactly right and also just enough. There's truth, too, in our version of the legend of the Buddha's enlightenment when it asserts that his final obstacle was self-doubt. In a sense, self-doubt is what all obstacles come down to. Yasutani Roshi said that if it wasn't for some form of not giving ourselves fully to the inquiry, holding back, self-absorbed, self-protective, doubting in a not useful way, we'd all have been fully enlightened ages ago. When people are passed on an initial koan, sometimes they fall into this kind of doubt. What? Can it be? Really? That's it? They may think, as long-standing dualistic habits of mind return. The voice of Mara is ancient and universal. Yet it need not be an obstacle. It's simply another Dharma gate we've got to pass through or wake to. I even know a senior Zen teacher who long ago, after being passed on an initial koan, put himself back on Mu for another 3 years before finally accepting what he already had. Many Zen teachers, when first sanctioned, may go through several years of feeling like frauds, even while they're teaching and guiding others well. We're all in the same boat, all members of the same one nose, two eyes society. The Buddha was no different. There's a lovely touch of myth in the story, too, when Kala Nagaraja, the Naga king, raises his head and linear relative time simply falls away. For an instant, we are in the inconceivability of timelessness. Time is only relative. if there's no one there to compare the movement of this time to the movement of another time, there's only timelessness. There's no way to gauge time at all. That bowl forging upstream against the current reminds us that we too must go against the flow of thoughts, concepts, and ideas that form a veil between us and this breeze, this breath, this pain in the knee, if we would awake, not to lodge in our thoughts, but to see through them. The little clink of bowl against bowl likewise tells its own story, dramatizing the truth that others before us have already fully traversed this ancient road. The legend of the Buddha's enlightenment is part of the classical canon and also an encouragement to our own practice right now. He wasn't the first, and he won't be the last. Buddhist tradition says that we all have the nature of Buddha, have exactly the same vast, empty nature of endlessly creative potential as Shakyamuni and all previous and all future Buddhas. From the first, we are each fully and equally endowed with limitless wisdom and compassion. And because it is already who we are, if we practice, if we make the effort, then we too can, to one degree or another, realize that is awake to our own, not in the sense of limited to us personally, but our own original, meaning all beings, original, mind. Of course, enlightenment is not a thing. It's not something we get for ourselves. Hey, I'm enlightened! If anything, it comes from losing, not gaining. Losing all we cling to. Losing all that ancient, interior, self-centered stuff that cuts us off from wind, rain, snow, sun, moon, stars, trees, animals, people. With that wonderful failure, that liberating loss, we find true selfless intimacy, which is what we've actually been seeking for who knows how long, for how very, very long. Enlightenment is a name given to our being able to attest to our original unblemished intimacy with sun, moon, stars, wind, rain, snow, clouds, trash, bugs, cats, rivers, mountains, trees, people. We do not gain it because it has never been lost. Like the ground, it has always been here. We just didn't have the steadiness to notice. Of course, it's not that I become intimate with everything. Rather, the so-called 10,000 things step in and replace me. I'm gone. Intimacy is that intimate. As the Prajna Paramita says, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. But Zen asks, okay, if we are this enlightened nature, then where is it? And why don't we know it? In our zazen, we bore into such questions like a thirsty person drilling for water. A sonar survey the life of the Buddha, the Jatakas, and Zen teaching itself show us that the water is there. We have a map, not blind belief. Our map shows us that all the water we will ever need is already right beneath our feet. And so we keep at it. We sit and sit. We go to Doksan, hear Teisho, go to Sesshin, examine precepts in our daily lives, experience the breath, count the breath, just sit, or endlessly return to koan point after koan point. The Buddha, the ex-prince, touched the earth after lifetimes of practice, as the Jatakas show. For many people, too, it may not be until years into their practice and after initial milestones that the gate truly opens and they know. Still, the Buddha's enlightenment tradition holds was unique, for it was complete, every level of character and mind fully realized, and it was so. because of the many lifetimes of work that Jataka show preceding it. In substance, every kensho, the small kind we're likely to realize, and the Buddha's great enlightenment are exactly the same. But in content, they are vastly different. Buddhist mythos says that in this world age, no one experienced more deeply than Shakyamuni, because no one had worked so hard or so long to prepare the ground. He touched not only the ground, but the bottomless bottom and the soaring heights. Comparing our realization of practice, our practice of realization, to his would be like comparing the finger painting of a kindergartner to a work by Rembrandt or Picasso. The substance is the same. Both are paintings, but their degree of conscious realization is vastly different. Yet, we must all begin somewhere, and for the kindergartner, that finger painting can be just as meaningful as Rembrandt's work was for him. The Buddha's story, his home leaving and forest path exertions, his abandonment by his ascetic disciples, and his solitary face-off with Mara, the primordial force of his and our innate ignorance, completes his many lifetime Jataka path. Touching the earth, he gets up and walks on, transcending the final temptation to sit forever at ease in his long-sought, hard-won pavilion of complete enjoyment, freedom, wisdom, and peace. Instead, he devotes the next 50 years of his life to walking the dusty roads and teaching those who, while in reality as complete and whole as he, just don't know it. He goes back into the seeming chaos of the 10,000 things, at peace with it all, a half smile on his lips. How could this be? Case number 37, Shoyoroko, Book of Serenity, throws some light here. Kweishan, that would be Isan in Japanese, asked Yangshan, that would be Kyozan in Japanese, suppose a man asks you, how about one who says, all sentient beings are in a disorderly karmic consciousness and have no base to rely upon? How would you treat him? Yangshan said, if a man appears, I call to him. When he turns his head, instantly I say, what is that? I wait while he hesitates, and then I say to him, there is not only disorderly karmic consciousness, but there is no base to rely upon. Kweishan said, oh, good. Just prior to the moment of enlightenment, after the Buddha to be's 6 years of exhaustive effort and endless kalpas of Jataka practice exertions, going the limit, trying and trying with all he had, drawing on the power of his own countless efforts, failures, and triumphs, Mara, the Buddhist tempter or distractor, the inner voice of ego, in our version of the account, takes off his masks and appears nakedly. Mara, worried, makes a last-ditch effort to turn the once sheltered, now deeply determined ex-prince from his goal. So Mara pulls out his ace in the hole, self-doubt. What? I have this true nature, it's me, and I can realize it? Really? This doubt convinces us to believe in the solidity of a forever separate, winning, losing, interior self, gluing us to what is merely provisionally real. Mara confronts the Buddha to be and asks, how could you, a sheltered ex-prince, be worthy of the supreme goal of complete and perfect enlightenment? Get real. Better men and women than you have tried and failed. You're young and a beginner to boot. Give yourself time. Eventually you might do it. You've got the basic ability. But now, no way. Back off. Take it slow. It's a reasonable request and reasonable advice. Reasonable as all get out. Devilishly reasonable. Take it easy. Be careful. Go slow and steady. Prepare, reduce attachments and ego concerns. Be humble. Don't be hasty. At this crucial juncture, with worlds hanging in the balance, Siddhartha doesn't waste breath arguing with the habit voice of his own separateness. his own predilection towards self-centeredness or egotism. He doesn't even try to put together a reasonable counter-argument. To enter the fray is to have already lost. Ready? Not ready? The self that gains, the self that loses, the self that has it, the self that doesn't have it. He doesn't get sucked into Mara's metaphor at all. Instead, seeing the joke, he probably smiled, maybe even allowed himself the luxury of shaking his head in pity for poor old Mara. Then he reached down and touched the earth, and let the earth witness for him. And the earth, witness to all the countless Jatakas, replied with thousands of voices speaking as one. Interbeing, to use Thich Nhat Hanh's felicitous term, awakes and Mara is overwhelmed. His last effort to tempt the Buddha-to-be to cling to a limited view has been crushed. Jataka tales are the record of the Buddha's own practice history. It is a particularly long history said to go back eons, world ages, big bangs. According to Buddhist tradition, we too have our own Jataka history. Things happened that made us who we are. We stumbled, scratched our knees, got up, let the wound scab over, and tried again. We met with joys and sorrows. Perhaps our history might also extend back through ages, where, after all, does the path of causation that unfolds as each plant, bug, animal, bird, us, you and me, begin. Bodhidharma's one-mind precept states, self-nature is inconceivably wondrous. Our nature, the nature that right now hears sounds, feels sensations, thinks thoughts. This nature that gets hungry and eats, gets tired and sleeps, is wondrous. A cut bleeds and then it heals. A veggie burger becomes a thought, a symphony, a heartbeat, a length of muscle. Inconceivably wondrous self-nature is who we are, like the ground. It has always been here. At his moment of final challenge, the Buddha touched the earth, the humble ground beneath him. He didn't reach for the sky or beg for help from something or someone somewhere up above. He didn't fall for Mara's metaphor, try to win the debate and out-argue the distractor. He simply touched the always present, selfless, sat on, trod on ground and asked the earth to testify to what she'd seen. Her humble, solid response confirms him, overwhelming all doubt, even self-doubt. What builds solid ground beneath us is the work we do now. Roshi Kapleau used to say, if you don't let the Dharma down, the Dharma will never let you down. No sincere effort is wasted. What makes it such a lovely story is that it's not simply ancient history. It's our story too. This moment is part of the ongoing Jataka series of the unfully realized Buddhas we each are. Essential nature, mind itself, the ground beneath us, is always here. Past lives, past thoughts, decisions, and events lead to this present one in which we sit, walk, stand, speak, eat, work, worry, create, pick our noses. Come day's end, we say good night and lie down on the ground of our nature, the ground we practice from, have always been standing on, whether we know it or not. And it too is always there, ready to testify for us, if we ask it. Our fundamental vow as human beings is to know ourselves. This is why we practice. Not to become special thises or that's, but simply to know who or what we already actually are. Zen Master Dogen famously wrote out the central realization of our practice in a few well-chosen words. When the self advances to become one with the 10,000 things, it is called delusion. When the 10,000 things advance and confirm the self, it is called enlightenment. The 10,000 things are birds, bugs, clouds, mountains, rivers, people, animals, traffic sounds, cell phones, raindrops, pebbles, clumps of earth, bright morning stars. Ordinary things confirm us, tell us, indeed make us who we are every day. In reality, there is no barrier between us and a single thing. That enlightenment is intimacy is not cleverness. It is simply how things are. And so we can awake to it. In fact, touching the earth is always possible, because the real ground is never far away. So we will stop here, recite our great vows for all beings, and then move to downstairs to the altar by the Doksan line for our work chant and a period of Sammo, Sangha work together.